I'd like to start with Netflix and Roku, given that they're on this list of top stocks to watch. What do you think? Are they going to defy the odds for investors this year?
And look, I think all signs point to, if you think about what is happening to consumer behavior, we have really shifted over the last few years. The pandemic certainly was an accelerant, but we've shifted from linear TV to streaming TV, and there's no going back. If you think about sort of the fall, we just finished up, right? The fall and winter TV season, and there's nothing new on TV that anyone was talking about. Everything that was being quote unquote discussed was happening on streaming. The biggest show of fall 2021, right? What was it? Squid Game. Nothing else was even close. Squid Game had more viewership than any linear TV has had in, probably forever as you think back, like the numbers were just staggering. So sports is still holding up. There's no doubt about it that sports is still holding up. The NFL was up 10% year over year, coming out of the pandemic, and that was great for the NFL. But from an entertainment content, it really is completely a streaming game. And I think if you think about Netflix, their content slate in Q4 and into the first half of 2022 is incredible. And I think, especially with Disney Plus sort of in a lull, as they sort of ramp up more towards the back half of the year, Netflix is in a very good position for 2022. And we think expectations are far too low. Investors have definitely been getting nervous. The stock's been pulling back. But I think as you think about engagement into 2022, I think people are going to be surprised by the run Netflix is going to have over the course of 22.
Well, Netflix earnings coming up next week. I'm curious what you're expecting there. And, do they need to keep Squid Game level hits coming, or do they lose that momentum?
I think one of the problems with Netflix is that you can't sort of predict Squid Games. Like if you had gotten Reed Hastings and Ted Sarandos in a room and said, what's your biggest titles for 2022? I'm sure in the top 20 was not going to be Squid Games. The reality is when you take a tremendous amount of shots on goal, and Netflix takes far more than everybody else, you're going to have hits. You're going to have lots of misses, but you're going to have lots of hits. And that's sort of what's happening, is that things happen. No one was predicting Stranger Things when it happened. Sure, there was something like The Crown that people thought was a pretty good shot on goal and would hit. But very often what's happened with Netflix is the things that you didn't expect are the ones that really work. Like nobody thought Lupin, a French TV show, was going to captivate, or Casa de Papel, which is Money Heist in the US, but that's a Spanish show. Like nobody predicted those were going to be the breakout shows. And so, I just think when you look at sort of the titles that have been really successful, it's not so easy to predict, but the aggregate amount of content is why you keep turning on Netflix time and time again. Is there's just a lot to watch. There's always something to go back to. Whereas most of the other services that we could talk about, Emily, are things you turn on every once in a while. Like, hey, there's a new episode of Hawkeye. So you turn on, or, if you think about, some of the Lucasfilms content on Disney Plus, a new episode airs, a 40-minute episode airs once a week. And so there's 40 minutes to turn it on once a week. Most of these services do not have a reason to spend hours every single night. And that's their biggest problem right now relative to Netflix, is Netflix is giving you a reason to never leave, and to give everyone in your family a reason not to leave. And that's the big competitive advantage they have.
HBO Max just had its biggest digital premiere ever with Euphoria. Meantime, the Sex and the City reboot was a total flop. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but I just did. How confident are you that HBO can keep hits coming under new leadership and David Zaslav since Discovery's takeover of Warner Media?
White Lotus, there's been a lot of kind of high profile content that's, Mayor of Easttown. Like HBO had a pretty good 2021. If you think about sort of domestic subscriber growth, I don't think anybody had more domestic subscriber growth than HBO did last year. So the strategy of putting new release movies directly onto HBO Max clearly worked. And I think Jason Kylar and the team at HBO Max deserves a lot of credit for doing something that wasn't easy to do during the pandemic, but I think it worked out very well. They don't get a lot of credit for it, but I think it did work out very well. They're going back to movie theaters this year. I think it'll work very well for Batman, which comes out in March, but I do think that the movie studio business movie theater business remains very challenged, and that's going to be a real issue. In terms of HBO's content, Casey Blouse is staying. I think all signs point to Casey's safe inside of the new Warner Bros. Discovery management structure. I think he's critical for the team to retain, and all signs point to Casey very much being safe. You've got a bunch of really exciting content coming up later this year on HBO. So I wouldn't be worried about HBO at all.
And obviously, as you mentioned, it's the world of everything plus. Everyone launching their own streaming network. Some of those networks go live this year. For example, CNN Plus, of course, Paramount Plus, Apple TV Plus. Do you think this is the year we really see the true beginning of the death of cable, the real nail in the coffin, or is this going to be a long and drawn out process where it's just a TV jumble out there and there's no such thing as a TV guide?
I think last year was really that year. I mean, I think most of these services, if you think about it, the big shift was from 2020 into 2021. In 2021, everybody launched a streaming service, right? Like in 2020, it was like the Disney Plus show joining Netflix and Amazon and Hulu. But 2021 was when Discovery Plus launched and Paramount Plus, and so I think it's when Apple TV Plus really found its own footing and became something that people really were paying attention to with Ted Lasso. And I really feel like 2021 was that kind of demarcation line where we fully entered the streaming era. No one outside of sports is talking about linear, traditional linear television anymore. I think 2022, you'll see some incremental launches. You mentioned CNN Plus, but there isn't a lot left to launch. And I think that's one of the challenges that Roku's been talking about, is that last year had a tremendous amount of new service launches that don't repeat this year, is definitely a headwind from a Roku standpoint as you look into 2022 that they've actually been quite open about.
Quick question, give us one or two that won't survive. Which ones don't make it?
Look, we've already been calling for consolidation. It is hard to imagine as you look out, Discovery Plus is going to get folded into HBO Max. That's in our 22 for 22 predictions from LightShed. But I think beyond that, is Peacock big enough? Does Peacock need to buy something, merge with something? Paramount Plus, we think Viacom should buy Lionsgate so that they can combine Starz content in. These companies need to get bigger. They don't have enough scale. They don't have enough big, bold franchise content. And you're playing a game now where the amount of money being spent, we're talking not just billions, we're talking tens of billions. This is a very, very serious financial game now, and it's going to require massive scale.